Hi, everybody. I'm Alice K. Reckelhaus from Suffering Well, and today I want to invite you into one of the most quietly powerful devotions in the Christian tradition, the Seven Sorrows Rosary, which we sometimes call the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. This devotion doesn't rush us past pain, and that's one of the things that I like about it. It does not explain suffering away. Instead, it places us beside Mary and teaches us how to remain faithful when sorrow is unavoidable. And here's what we're going to do together today. First, I'll explain what the Seven Sorrows Rosary is and why the Church treasures it. Then we'll walk briefly through each of Mary's seven sorrows. Finally, and this is where we're going to spend the most time today, we'll reflect on what we can learn from each sorrow and how Mary suffered it well, so that her way of loving becomes a guide for our own lives. At the end, I'll invite you to choose one sorrow that resonates with you right now and to stay with Mary there. We'll also include a link at the end of this video to take you directly to the actual Seven Sorrows Rosary. So, what is the Seven Sorrows Rosary? The Seven Sorrows Rosary is a devotion that meditates on seven pivotal moments of suffering in the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary. These sorrows are drawn directly from Scripture and from the Church's long contemplation of Mary's role in salvation history. Now, one of the things that I really like about this is that it doesn't make sorrow and suffering evil. This is something that we each have in our lives, and we're often led to believe that we're bad if we have suffering, that we must have gotten it from sin, or that we don't have enough faith. But in the Catholic tradition, we believe that suffering is very important. It's part of what grows our faith, it's part of what helps us to trust God. It brings us into a deeper intimacy with Him. So the rosary is structured differently from the traditional Dominican rosary. Instead of decades focused on the life of Christ, it centers on Mary's participation in his suffering, not as a passive observer, but as a faithful disciple who remained present, believing, and loving when everything seemed lost. The Church has encouraged this devotion for centuries because it forms something essential in us, a heart that can remain open to God in suffering without becoming bitter, hardened, or despairing. Mary does not escape sorrow. She enters it fully and teaches us how to endure it without letting it destroy love. So first of all, let's have a brief overview of the seven sorrows of Mary. Let's name each sorrow first so we can see the arc of her suffering. The first one is the prophecy of Simeon. Mary learns that a sword will pierce her heart. The second one is the flight into Egypt. She becomes a refugee to protect her child. Third is the loss of Jesus in the temple. She searches in anguish for 3 days. And of course, in the joyful mysteries, we have her finding him in the temple. So we see both sides of that coin. Number four, Mary meets Jesus on the way to the cross. She watches him suffer publicly. That is probably to me the most poignant of the stations of the cross, because when Jesus meets his mother, he sees her suffering, and that probably makes his suffering even worse. Number five, the crucifixion and death of Jesus. Mary stands at the foot of the cross. She stands, she doesn't crumple. Number six, Jesus is taken down from the cross and she receives his broken body. And seven, the burial of Jesus. She lays him in the tomb and waits in darkness. Okay, so let's slow down and ask the deeper question. How did Mary suffer these sorrows well? And what does that teach us? So let's look first at the prophecy of Simeon. It's a suffering that's announced before it arrives. So Mary's suffering begins not with tragedy, but with prophecy. Simeon blesses her child, then turns to her and says that a sword will pierce her heart. What do we learn from this? Mary teaches us how to live with foreknown sorrow, the kind of suffering we know is coming but we can't prevent. Chronic illness, a fragile relationship, a diagnosis that hasn't worsened yet but might. Mary does not panic. She doesn't demand explanations. She ponders. She carries the knowledge quietly, trusting God without knowing how it will unfold. To suffer this well is to live faithfully without needing certainty. And this is something that builds our faith when we apply this to our own hearts. The second sorrow is the flight into Egypt. So this is suffering that uproots your life. Mary becomes a refugee overnight. No preparation, no stability, just obedience and fear and flight. Here, Mary teaches us how to suffer displacement when life is suddenly uprooted. It can be the loss of home, loss of safety, loss of a relationship, loss of what felt secure. Mary does not cling to what was. She moves forward to protect life. She chooses love over comfort. To suffer this well is to prioritize what truly matters, even when everything else must be left behind. So this is how I worked through this at one point. And actually, I've used this method in a number of times in my life. When I was in Minnesota, there was a time when I thought I could end up homeless and on the streets. And that's a pretty scary thing, especially someplace as cold as Minnesota. Um, but I have learned to look for the worst case scenario. And that sounds very pessimistic, but let me explain why. So I say, okay, what's the worst that can happen? I think of that and I think, can I trust God with that? Okay, so what if I become homeless? Can I trust God with that? I got myself to the place where, yes, I could. So what if it's winter and I'm homeless? Can I trust God with that? Yes, I finally was able to trust God with that. Kind of thinking, oh, he might provide me a place or something. Okay, but what's even worst case scenario? I get really sick in the cold. Maybe I even die. Okay, can I trust God with dying in the cold winter outside, completely homeless? Nobody there to take care of me or to help me or anything? And I finally decided, yeah, I can. I can trust him with that. I would be on my way to him. And that would be that's better than anything anyway, but in a situation like that where everything's so horrible, it's a little bit easier to look forward to heaven, I think. So that's my method of dealing with that. You might be able to come up with another method of dealing with this where suffering uproots your life. And if you have an example to share, please do, because that will benefit other people. Okay, so the third one is the loss of Jesus in the temple, suffering confusion and unanswered questions. So for 3 days, Mary doesn't know where her son is. The sorrow speaks to all who have cried out, God, where are you? Mary searches. She asks questions. She doesn't pretend peace she doesn't have. And when she finds Jesus, she listens, even when she fully doesn't understand. To suffer this well is to keep seeking God without withdrawing love, even when his ways confuse us. This is one of those times when Mary pondered these things in her heart. She had been looking frantically for Jesus with Joseph, and Jesus said, didn't you know I need to be about my father's business here in the temple? 12 years old, okay? She didn't say, hey, young man. She listened to him, and he came home with them and lived in obedience and grew up. But she pondered these things in her heart. The fourth is Mary meets Jesus on the way to the cross. As I said, this is the most agonizing one to me. This represents in our lives suffering publicly and helplessly. Mary sees her son beaten, mocked, and condemned. She can't stop it. She probably knows that it needs to happen. Here, Mary teaches us how to suffer witnessing another's pain, especially when we're powerless to fix it. Watching a loved one struggle, watching someone self-destruct, watching injustice unfold. It's hard to watch someone we love struggle. I think it's harder than when we struggle ourselves. Mary does not turn away. She remains present. To suffer this well is to stay even when presence is all you can offer. And sometimes I have to say, those people that we love don't even allow us to stay present. You can be present in prayer, not just physically present. You can be away from them, cut off from them, and continue to pray for them and continue to put them in the Lord's hands. The fifth one is the crucifixion and death of Jesus, suffering the unthinkable. Mary stands at the foot of the cross. She does not collapse. She does not flee. She suffers fully, yet she does not despair. This sorrow teaches us that faithful suffering is not emotional numbness or strength. It is refusing to abandon love even when everything else is stripped away, even when we are experiencing incredible pain through that. To suffer this well is to remain faithful when faith feels like darkness. The sixth suffering is Jesus is taken down from the cross, suffering what cannot be undone. Mary receives her son's lifeless body. The sorrow speaks to irreversible loss, death, regret, finality. Mary does not rush past grief. She receives the body. She allows herself to mourn. To suffer this well is to honor grief without letting it become bitterness. I wish I had known about this when my husband was killed in a car accident. I had a very difficult time allowing myself to grieve. I feel like I still haven't really let myself grieve completely. I've had so many responsibilities in relationship to his death. I'm still working on his estate. And those things don't allow me to spend the time grieving. If I didn't have those, would I spend the time grieving? I'm not sure. But learning this helps me to consider setting some time aside specifically to grieve. Number 7, the burial of Jesus, suffering the waiting. Mary places Jesus in the tomb and waits. She waits without answers, without reassurance, without visible hope. But she trusts God. To suffer this well is to trust God in silence, believing that darkness is not the end, even when there's no evidence yet. So what do the seven sorrows teach us altogether? Mary does not suffer perfectly because she feels peaceful. She suffers well because she remains faithful, loving, and open to God in every stage of sorrow. She does not explain suffering. She shows us how to endure it without losing our soul. So as we close, I want to invite you to choose one of these sorrows, just one. You can choose another one later, but focus on one right now so that you really get everything out of it. Choose one that resonates with your life right now. Sit with it. Pray with it. If you're a journaler, journal about it. If you have a really close friend that you can talk about it with, talk about it. But mainly, ask Mary, how did you suffer this well? What can I learn from you here? Let her be your companion, not above you, but beside you. Because the Seven Sorrows Rosary is not just a devotion about Mary's pain. It's a school of love for anyone learning how to suffer without losing hope.